Nasie in gesprek met trots aan jou gebring deur Afgri, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senwes, Engen, Graan SA en John Deere.
Die Nasie in gesprek paneelbesprekings het weer eens plaasgevind by die Nampo oesdag. Ons gaan kyk na die gesprek deur Bruce Whitfield van The Money Show spesifiek oor grondonteiening en vergoeding. Ons sluit by Bruce aan.
Hello and welcome to Nation in Conversation, broadcasting from Nampo Harvest Day in Bothaville. I am Bruce Whitfield, and we've got guests in studio. We've got a live studio audience. You can make yourselves known, studio audience. People must know that you're here. Applause, please. Applause. Thank you. Live studio audience. We wouldn't lie to you. Right next to me, Francois Strydom is with Senwes. Next to him, Pierre Venter from the Banking Association of South Africa. The Banking Association represents the interests of South Africa's big banks. Next is John Purchase. He's from AgBiz. And Mpumelelo is also with us. Mpumelelo Mkabela. He is from Ntambose Consult. So welcome to our panelists this morning. It's this afternoon. It is this afternoon here at Nampo in Bothaville. Mpumelelo, I'm going to start with you. Yeah. Land restitution, that's what we're talking about today, and particularly at a time of deep political conflict in South Africa, where 24 years in, 23 or 24 years into our democracy, we haven't seen the economic liberation that many people hoped would accompany political liberation, and the land issue is being put front and center of what is troubling South Africa today. From a political perspective, you're doing your PhD in political science right now. Give us a perspective, please.
Well, you have to look at it from a political, historical, economic, cultural point of view. Historical, in a sense that we all know our history is a history of dispossession. From 1652 up to 1994, it's been a painful history of oppression of the majority of people. At the heart of that oppression has been land dispossession. And the secondary elements were exploitation, labor exploitation, and other systems that followed from that. But with the dispossession of the land came the cultural aspect, the sentimental attachment to the land and everything that flows from that. And of course, the deprivation of capital, land as capital, not as land for settlement purposes. So you have a whole range of historical factors that necessitates the kind of discussion we're having today. So what was supposed to have happened from 1994 up to now? You remember that at the early stages, the government had a target that by 2014, 30% of land should have been distributed to the previously dispossessed or disadvantaged. We all know the government failed on its target. We also know that even the little that the government managed to distribute to the previously dispossessed to address all of these factors that I'm talking about, very little of it has been put to good use. So we now have a situation where income inequalities are so rife in this country that people are now looking for solutions to the problem. And as a result of which, you find all kinds of radical proposals. Some people are saying expropriate without compensation. Other people are saying, well, the Constitution doesn't allow it, but constitutional experts say, yes, you can do it provided you comply with the other clause in the Constitution. It says you can expropriate for public purpose or for a public interest purpose, as in for land reform, but you have to comply with the other aspect, which is compensate equitably. So we're having all of these debates right now, and as a result of the fact that we couldn't succeed in the last 23 years to do what the government set out to do. So it's a policy failure on the part of government. It's also now resulting into all kinds of unnecessary radical calls from the left of the political spectrum. And then you have unemployment, low economic growth, which is now festering this tension in society. So, but my view is that we should always try and go back to what got us into the election in 1994, the negotiations that have happened. That spirit of conversations among different sectors, even different, in fact, warring factions in society, to come back to that and some kind of a codessa of sort. It doesn't have to be in the same format, but it can be in different formats where we sit around the table, discuss what can we do to get the country to move forward.
I just want to clarify something you said that's really important. Land as capital, not for settlement. Just clarify for me what you mean.
I'll put it simple. If the government builds you an RDP house, it's pure settlement. It's not capital. You don't even own the RDP house. You don't even own the land on which the RDP house is built because the government doesn't give you title. So you can't even go to the bank and raise a loan out of that few square meters where the land is located. So for as long as you can't raise capital out of it, it means you don't have a capital base.
Yeah.
So that's pure settlement.
Okay.
So what we're talking about for agricultural purposes, for broader land reform purposes, goes beyond settlement. We're talking about land as capital, as a means of production.
Okay. Francois Stroden, let's go to you from Senves. I mean, how nervous are you? How nervous are your members about this, the politics of land right now?
Look, I think, Bruce, it does affect them, but as all good businessmen in every sector of the food value chain, they stick to their guns. And I think it's now, I agree with Mpumelelo's last statement. You can use an issue as a divider or as a unifier. Look, the history that we have, it's a known fact. So
I mean, Mpumelelo makes the point that there's been a policy failure on behalf of government. So government, therefore, is under huge pressure to rectify the policy, and it could do so alone, or it could do so in collaboration and in cooperation with the agricultural sector. Are those channels of communication open, and are they functioning as well as they should be?
I think, like in every sector, the businessmen are open to new things, to new policies, to new ways of improving their business. So you will find a businessman who will listen to the logic of the idea. Let's take land and...
You're talking about logic, but land isn't necessarily all about logic. There's a huge amount of pent-up frustration and emotion and raw anger, which defies any kind of logic that you might want to bring into the conversation.
Yes.
And that's the great divide right now in terms of land, isn't it?
I'll make the statement that politically, the political animals would want that divide, because that's the environment in which they thrive. They want to blow this political divide, because that's how their business model works like that. So I'm a businessman. I can only stick to that. I must follow that route, and that's where I want to let's build the argument. Let's work around that fact.
That's where you want to build the argument, and I accept that that's where you want to build the argument, but you're not in charge of the argument. The argument is on the streets. The argument is in poor townships. The argument is amongst far more people than you can muster together to have a logical discussion about the future of land. The argument is one of life and death, and the perception of the value that is tied up in the land.
Yes. But let me tell you about life and death. So, and if the maize price, like last year, is at 5,000 Rand. That's life and death.
Yeah.
So when the food prices go out the window, that's life and death. When we get the business sector to focus around around the ideas of the multiplying effect of agriculture in the economy, that's how we fix it. It might not be the argument in the streets, but that's the solution.
It may be. John Purchase, I mean, you represent the agricultural business value chain, if you like. I mean, yes, you can talk businesses until you're blue in the face. But if you've got, I don't know how many unemployed people are there in South Africa, 16 or 17 million social grants are paid every month to about 10 million people, that's an awful lot of social pressure. And a very easy cauldron in an environment, as Mpumelelo so clearly spells out, of one of rising unemployment, rising economic dissatisfaction, the sense of dispossession, very easy political touch points that can be relied upon to take 10 million people, approximately, give or take, and say, you've had a raw deal. I mean, how nervous are you guys at Agbiz?
Yes, we are very involved in the debate with the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, with the Minister and senior officials continuously, since the release of the Green Paper in 2011 through the NAREC process and subsequently through various work streams that we have with them. And I think the problem with land reform is that the government hasn't delivered on its policies and promises to the electorate. And that's why we're in such a crunch situation at the moment. Now, we recognize that. We recognize that land reform must take place. There is a skewed ownership pattern. It's how it takes place and what your end goals are. And you've got to balance the rights of the population to economic inclusivity, in other words, also to the right to property ownership, with your economic situation, and then also with food security. So it's a balancing game that you've got to play to redress the past, but in the process, not damage your economy, maintain the land market, and ensure that we have food security in this country. If we don't get that balancing act right, then you're in a zero game to the bottom.
Absolutely.
And that's in essence what this debate has got to be about. I think Judge Albie Sachs wrote a seminal piece about a week ago exactly on this issue. And he said, but the Constitution provides a framework for what he termed radical land reform without going outside of the Constitution. If you want to go expropriation without compensation, without a doubt, you will have to change the Constitution fairly distinctly, especially Clause 25. So,
what is Clause 25?
Clause 25 is the clause, and it's quite a long clause with good guidelines around property, not just farmland property or fixed property, also all property. And it deals with how property must be dealt with in the Constitution. But it just gives you a framework. And that framework, I think government has not interpreted correctly and has not been put in place the right policies and plans to implement. I think part of the problem is also is an implementation problem. We've spent billions and billions of rand on land restitution and reform and don't show enough for it. I think that is part of the problem that we have.
Mpumelelo made the point that we've seen land reform attempts and we've seen quite clumsy implementation of land reform where farmers have said, well, there's your land, there's a tractor, here's some seed, good luck, and off government goes to the next project. And very often these farmers have been set up almost to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, is that your observation?
Yes, well, the minister a while back, a couple of years ago, said that 90% of the farms that had been restituted were non-functional, where land had been given back to the original owners. And many of the farms, both through restitution, where the land has been given back where they haven't taken money, but also through PLUS, the proactive land acquisition strategy, which is their redistribution policy. Many of those farms are also not functional or being farmed optimally. And that is because the skills are not necessarily there, the support measures are not necessarily there.
Let's give a turn to Pierre Venter from the Banking Association. I mean, you guys, your members must be particularly concerned because it's not the farmers of Bothaville and beyond that really do own the land. Your members own the land. I mean, at least half the land, probably. Farmers have got, 145 billion rand in debt or thereabouts to organizations like Centralwest or Senvest, I beg your pardon. I'm going back 20 years, Senvest, and to your member banks.
We're concerned. I think if there was a collapse, expropriation without compensation, the banks would be able to ride through it. We have sufficient capital. Our banks are well capitalized and about 48 billion rands worth of exposure directly linked to property. We'd be able to ride through it. It would create a crisis, but I think the secondary impact on SA Inc. is far more serious because your financial system is interlinked, and what you will see is the collapse of our stock exchange, the downgrade in South Africa, and ultimately it would lead to food insecurity.
What does a poor person living in a shack in an informal settlement who's never had a job and they're 45 years old give a damn about that? It makes absolutely no difference to their livelihood, they feel, and Francois is going to slap me very soon, until food prices double. they don't see the consequence.
No, they don't, Bruce.
Of,
and I think that's
and they've got nothing to lose at this particular point of the debate.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what Francois was suggesting just now, that there really needs to be an informed position in South Africa, and I think an informed position is created through dialogue, and we've been promoting for some years the need for transformation in the agricultural sector. We've created that finance model that John was talking about a minute ago. But I think more importantly, Bruce, if you look last year, the Finance and Fiscal Commission, they produced a report, and that the chapter that deals on agriculture actually highlights the failure of our land reform in our country. Our sector is sitting with very high levels of uncertainty at the moment.
All these guys are talking a good talk. Is it going to wash?
Well, I think we have to start from the position that we're all agreed about the constitutional requirements, that there has to be transformation in the ownership patterns in the country. And I think from what John is saying, there's clearly an agreement, there's commitment on the side of the current owners of the land to work with new emerging farmers, but the government also must get its policies right. I think at the heart of this thing, beyond all these pontifications about principles and things like that, the bottom line is that we have to get the skills revolution in this country running, so that even with policy failures, where the government, for whatever reason, fails to implement some of its projects, but we've got a skills revolution where we've got people that are skilled in what they want to do. And then you have to have a pocket of many South Africans who can actually do stuff outside government assistance. So that they can come. I mean, the other day I read a story about Ngebulana, the guy who owns Rebosis, the property company. He said, I started my company from the scratch, no assistance from anybody. There's a new BE charter that's now the government is talking about. He says, well, maybe it will come, property charter, maybe it will come, but it will find me already up there. So if we have a good skills revolution, it can mitigate against failures on the part of government. Sometimes government is not willing, it's not about failing necessarily. It's about bureaucracy, it's about contesting policy positions with other parties and other sectors. So things can get slow. But if we have got a skills revolution in agriculture across the whole value chain, from the financing part, from project management, extension officer, I'm told we don't have proper, enough extension officers in this country. And, agricultural scientists across the whole value chain. You train young black people who are interested in farming. We can break the legacy of dispossession, because dispossession came with dispossession of skill, unfortunately.
Somebody sent a message into my radio show last night saying, when you have your panel discussion tomorrow, which is today, please ask your panelists about transformation in agricultural colleges. I mean, there's an agricultural college in Potch, there's Sadara, which is the famous one in KZN, there must be others. How many of the young people in agricultural college today are black? Any clue? Anybody in the audience know? Anybody know? Majority. Yeah. Okay. So we're seeing there's a pipeline of talent coming through agricultural colleges. Where are they going? What's happening to them?
So certainly the formal business sector pick up a lot of them.
But they're not going into farming?
Well, some of them are going into farming. But this is not purely about farming. So this is about the whole value chain.
Sure.
Because it doesn't help. We have a very good farming sector, but the whole value chain isn't functional. So we're really talking across the competitive landscape of value production. And I see them coming through. But the point is the big and the forward-looking businessmen are drawing that into them. They're the guys that's employing the masses, that's creating jobs. Look, I think there's a misconception about government's role. Government was never meant to be an implementer. It has to set the scene. Business has to implement.
Has business done everything it needs to do in the last 23, 24 years?
No, I don't think so. No, you can always say, there's gaps. But certainly, they are where they are, and they're world competitive for doing more things right than wrong.
Sure. What could business have done more effectively in the last 24 years that they could ramp up in the next 5 to actually see a tangible difference in transformation in agriculture?
Look, I think one of the good points that was made at the media launch last night is better integration at local level. So we still, I think, we still are too divided at local level. We don't know each other well enough. Businessmen doesn't work well enough. Farmers adjacent to each other doesn't work well enough. So typically this platform, to take that down to local level and foster the debate and find solutions, because this is really what South Africa is about. We've had enough of talking and of shouting. We have to implement and get successes on the ground. So I think those are typically things that we can and should do.
For all of the logic and the sense and the good value conversation that we're having, speaking in the echo chamber of this room and online, and I'm sure everyone who's watching it is appreciating the discussion. The trouble is, it is a political football. Political opportunists are going to leap upon every gap that is created simply to get votes at the ballot box come 2019, come 2024 and 2029 and beyond. So we've got 10 minutes in which each one of you has got 2 minutes to give me a solution as to how you would like to see it play out. So I'm going to go with you first. From a Senvest perspective, given a magic wand to solve the land issue, how would you best like to see it work out?
So I would stick to my guns as a businessman. I believe that facilitates change in the most positive and in the biggest way. Do your job. If you look up every few seconds to listen to politicians and to this volatility, it distracts you from doing your business. Point one. The second thing, it doesn't facilitate the process. And this is the one thing that both the statesmen we had since 1652 incidentally said. Jan Smuts and Nelson Mandela said, business, or the business of the day, ordinary citizens will take us forward, not politicians. Politicians has another view, has another role to play, if they play it correctly, to facilitate the environment. So what my advice is, stick to your business, do the best you can. And that will facilitate the process. It is a natural process to grow your business, to include more people that is currently included, to include the whole population.
John Purchase?
Yes, I think firstly we must say that land reform in South Africa over the past 20 years has not been successful, or has not been nearly as successful as it should have been.
Which means it's been a failure. I mean, let's call it a failure.
Yeah, and we need an honest assessment of what went wrong in terms of policies and implementation, and not just from government side, also from business side. So I think, yes, you can look from it from private sector side, but you must also look at it from government side. And within the department, I mean, there are so many disciplinary hearings and disciplinary process at top level where there is hardly any capacity at the moment. So we must understand that it's playing the blame game the whole time, and apportioning blame is going to be difficult. What we need is key role players to get together and have that conversation of where do we take it forward.
Mpumelelo, last word to you for this part of the program.
Well, I think that all the different sectors have an important role to play. Government needs to...
You're sounding like a politician, not like a political scientist. To cut to the chase.
You know, the government has to relook at the way it does, policy formulation, right? The business people want policy certainty, right? It has to be sorted. Property rights, how you get, land redistributed, that mechanism needs to be clarified as soon as possible so we can take out all the political hot air and deal with the real issue. On the other hand, business people, where government fails, they have an obligation to lead. I'll just make a very simplistic example. We know that when apartheid became unprofitable, it was hitting business people in the pockets. What did they do? They ran to Dakar, they ran to London to speak to the ANC to initiate the discussions. That's how the negotiations started. Business people took a lead because the system was beginning to be unprofitable for them. They don't have to wait for the moment where we have a crisis in South Africa, or where we've got food shortages because the politicians decided to expropriate the land. without compensation. And the stock market crashed, the banks collapsed because they are indebted, the landowners are indebted via the banks. So we don't have to wait for that crisis. We can imagine it. And then out of that imagination, begin to take steps to avoid the crisis. So business people where government is not working can take a lead. But I want to end more controversial. During the apartheid era, black people are not allowed to own land in urban areas or even start businesses in urban areas because it was part of the grand scheme of apartheid, right? You had to do your stuff in the homelands. So the government didn't want black people to do that. Post-94, the government doesn't trust black people. It can't give them title deeds. So they were damned then, and now in a different way now, where the government is speaking about transformation and transferring property rights to black people and all of that. It doesn't give them title deeds. The government wants to babysit people because there's a big fear. I don't know whether it's real or perceived that if you give black people the title of the land to which they've just been resettled, they might sell the land and go away. Or if it's an RDP house, they'll sell the RDP house and go and queue again for another one. So I think that the government must move away from this thing of not trusting black people. That black people are not going to own up to what they've been given as part of the redress policy. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that needs to happen there. Transformation is an imperative. It must happen. But conversations must happen to say, how do we move forward without undermining each other? Black people must be given their sense of agency back to them that the apartheid government deprived them. They must feel they have it. They must feel they can take control of their lives. And if they make mistakes, they may lose out and they can learn out of it. But that's really empowerment for me.
Mbumalolo, thank you very much. And to our panel, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for joining us. Remember to follow us on Twitter. You can visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. That wraps up this part of the conversation here live from Nampo, from the Harvest Festival here at Nampo. It's been a very, very fiery conversation. It's been a very worthwhile conversation. Now it's time to put words into action. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Nasie in gesprek met trots aan jou gebring deur Afgri, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senwes, Engen, Graan SA en John Deere.